Salvete discipuli. We start our lesson today with the death of. Caligula. As you may remember, Caligula was killed by the Praetorian Guard, and right here you see a picture of the next emperor, this gentleman right here. And I love this painting because it shows my favorite part of his whole story. And that is that right when Caligula was killed, there was all this upheaval in the palace, and no one really knew for sure what was going to happen. This guy right here, Claudius, the guy who will end up being next emperor, at the time thought for sure that he was going to be killed as well. And so he ended up hiding behind some curtains that you can see here, and basically cowering, fearing for his life. When in fact the Praetorian Guard found him, he started begging them for his life, and they instead said, actually, sir, we'd like to make you emperor. So in this one moment here, he goes from thinking he's going to be killed to being petitioned to be the most powerful person in the world at the time. So pretty interesting shift of fortune right there. So some more information about Claudius here. His full name is Tiberius Claudius Nero Germanicus. He was born in about 10 BC and died in 54 AD, ruled from 41 to 54 AD. He is, of course, a Julio-Claudian emperor. He's obviously the fourth of them. The story of his rise to power. Actually, as a young boy, he was completely ignored by Augustus and Tiberius. And Caligula, obviously the previous emperor, used to mock him. The reason for this is that Claudius was deformed. He had a stutter. He was very nervous most of the time. He had a bit of a limp, apparently. Basically, he was lame. And in the ancient world, of course, they would often mock people like that or dismiss them. So nobody really thought that much of him, in fact. Despite his deformity, he was actually a very talented person. He was quite the scholar. He wrote a number of scholarly books, some on the history of the Etruscans and other historical books as well. But he had quite the intellect. As I said in the intro, he was promoted to the position of emperor by the Praetorian Guard. Now, why would they choose him? Essentially, I think they chose him because he was a member of Augustus's family, and they figured this was a guy that they could more or less manipulate or push around. So they were not too worried about this guy being a really strong leader. In fact, they liked the idea of them being able to puppet him, if you will. Now, the Senate was not that excited about Claudius being the ruler either, but when the Praetorian Guard brought Claudius to the Senate and said, this is going to be your emperor, the Senate was hesitant to resist the Praetorian Guard. End result, the Senate reluctantly agrees, and you have Claudius as the next emperor. Now, his reign includes a number of positives. First of all, and this might not sound like a big deal, but it really is, he really wanted to do a good job. I think he regretted how people had treated him, how people had dismissed him. And now that he was in this position of power, I think he wanted to prove to everyone that he could do a good job as emperor. He wanted to make Rome a better place. He fixed a number of Caligula's problems. As we talked about today in class, Caligula went a little bit mad. Caligula saw conspiracies everywhere. He fixed a number of these problems. He returned a number of people who had been exiled by Caligula. So when this happens, initially the Roman people are excited. They feel like, Caligula's tyrannical rule is over, so this is a good moment for the Roman people. He did a pretty good job of cooperating with the Senate. He did not try to intimidate them. He did not try to order them around. He tried to work together with them for the most part. The Senate, of course, was happy that this was the case. At the same time, though, the Senate was a little bit upset at Claudius because he used quite a number of freedmen. And of course, we know freedmen are former slaves. Okay, they were freed because of their talent or because they had amassed enough wealth to buy their freedom. Whatever the case may be, these were really talented people. Claudius relied on a number of these guys to run his government. Now, why would the Senate be bothered by this? Well, the Senate is full of a lot of native Romans, a lot of people from well-established families. And here you have freedmen, people, of course, who are likely not of Roman birth, ascending to powerful positions in government. The well-established Romans, all right, people from well-established Roman families would resent this. In the end, of course, these people were very capable, very talented, and very capable. He conducted a lot of trials, Claudius did, under his jurisdiction. He gave the courts a lot of attention. Okay, and he liked to be the guy in there as a judge, making sure that justice was handed out. Now, there are going to be some problems with this as well, because sometimes he's going to go too far, but he was really concerned that the courts run effectively. There were a lot of great public works in his term. In particular, the ports and the roads of Rome were improved vastly. A lot of this is done with public money, of course. He added 5 provinces to Rome, Britain among them. So he's increasing the size of Rome's empire, which of course is a positive to the Romans. Of course, there are also a number of negatives. There were many secret trials and executions reminiscent of what happened with Tiberius. Like many of the other Roman emperors, Claudius was a little bit paranoid at times, and of course sometimes he was right to be paranoid, but to keep himself safe, to keep his power intact, occasionally he had to conduct secret trials and then summary executions as a result. Now, of course, the more this starts to happen, the more upset the people start to get, but none of this ever reaches the scale that it reached under Caligula. Another big problem with Claudius is he did not establish a clear successor before he died. He had a natural son, and he also had a stepson through his wife. And it's his second wife, Agrippina, who moved her son Nero into succession. Had Claudius taken control of this situation, maybe Nero would not have been the guy that ended up succeeding him. Who knows? In the end, this is rather negative for Claudius for sure, he was poisoned to death. Some people are pretty convinced that Agrippina, his second wife, was responsible for it. And of course, she might have done that for the sake of Nero, but it's impossible to know for sure. Immediately upon his death, he was deified, so he was viewed as a god right after he was dead. Okay, and that brings us to our next emperor. This is the Emperor Nero. You see him here on your left, along with his lovely mother Agrippina, right here. Nero is going to rise to the throne, to the imperial throne at a very young age, and his mother is going to be a key player in the early years of his reign, and their story is a particularly interesting one. Also, an important part of Nero's story is Seneca, shown right here. Seneca, of course, was a philosopher, he was a playwright, he was a poet, and he was also Nero's tutor when Nero was young, and he was Nero's advisor in Nero's early years as emperor, which was important because Nero was so young. His full name, Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He was born in 37, died in 68, ruled from 54 to 68. His rise to power. As I noted, he was only 16 years old when he first becomes emperor. Claudius' son, Claudius' natural son, soon after is poisoned to death. Obviously, it could have been Nero that was involved in this poisoning. It could have been Nero's mother, Agrippina. Who knows for sure, but obviously those two had the most to gain from Claudius' natural son being killed. A guy named Burrus, who was a praetorian prefect, and Seneca were the two main advisors to Nero. These are the guys that kept him in line. These are the guys that made sure that he ruled responsibly. They were very often battling Agrippina, his mother, politically. She seemed to be a little more extreme than these two. Burrus and Seneca were somewhat conservative individuals, and they would have kept Nero on the straight path had they been allowed to advise him for his entire life. It gets to a point where Nero's mother Agrippina is so involved in political intrigue that Nero ends up having her killed. Wonderful story. When Nero wants to kill his mother, at one point he knew that she would be sailing on a ship, and he sent an assassin onto the ship to kill his own mother. The ship was rigged to fall apart. I don't know how they did this, but this is supposedly how it happened. The ship was rigged to fall apart. When the ship falls apart, all the people who are on the ship, including Nero's mother and the assassin, fall into the water. Nero's assassin was supposed to seek out Agrippina, seek out Nero's mother, and kill her while she was in the water, and that way nobody would know what really happened. Well, the problem is, when all the people from the ship are in the water trying to tread and stay alive, one of Nero's mother's serving ladies, thinking that it will increase her chances of survival, starts yelling out, "Save me, I'm Agrippina." When Nero's assassin hears this serving woman yelling out, I'm Agrippina," the assassin swims up to the serving woman and kills her, thinking it was Nero's mother. Nero's mother sees this happen and realizes she should keep quiet, and she survives this assassination attempt. There were maybe a couple more assassination attempts as well that failed, and eventually Nero gave up trying to hide it, and he basically just sent someone to club his mother to death. And that was the end of her. Now, like all these other emperors, there were some positives to Nero's reign. It was an effective but cautious administration under Burrus and Seneca. So as long as Burrus, that Praetorian prefect, and Seneca, his advisor, were in place, Nero did a pretty good job. Initially, the economy was in great shape. Okay, they did a good job managing the money. There was no extravagance. Okay, there was no lavish spending on things Rome didn't need. It was in good shape. Initially, there's an end of secret trials. Okay, the people like Nero, there's not a big need for these in the early years. Those are all the positives. Gives you some perspective here. The negatives. Burrus dies and Seneca retires in AD 62. And this is when it's going to all go downhill. And it's pretty clear in the end that these were the two guys that were keeping Nero sane, if you will. Nero then ends up spending a ton of money and most of his attention on horses, poetry, and games. He puts on lavish games for the Roman people. They love him for it, but he's spending way too much money on it. Sometimes he has the Roman people listen to him read his own poetry. Sometimes he has the Roman people listen to him play the lyre. Nero was 100% convinced that he was a brilliant artist, an absolutely brilliant artist. Sometimes Nero would even compete in chariot races with his own team of horses. Sometimes Nero would be the one that has a chariot with 6 horses while everybody else had 4. These are often not fair competitions, and everybody that's competing in these competitions knows that you don't want to beat Nero because bad things would happen. So very often these competitions were thrown. Soon enough, Nero and the Roman Empire run into financial problems. Why? He's spending way too much money on all of this entertaining. And when you have financial problems, you need to fix them. And one of the best ways to fix them is to implicate wealthy Romans in conspiracies, all right? Trump up charges against them, and you see a return to treason trials in an effort to raise money. So Nero starts pointing his finger at people, accusing them of treason. They have trials. These people are found guilty. Suddenly you can confiscate their wealth and your money problems go away. Seneca at one point is implicated in a conspiracy against Nero. All All right, this is the very same Seneca who was Nero's tutor as a young boy, his advisor as emperor. We have no idea if Seneca was really involved in the conspiracy or not, but the end result is Nero orders Seneca to kill himself, and Seneca obeys. Perhaps the most famous part of Nero's reign is that there's this huge fire in Rome in AD 64. This fire, we're not 100% sure what started it, but this fire consumes a huge part of Rome. Legend has it that while the fire was burning, Nero was reciting some of his own poetry, in fact. But we don't know for sure. The end result, and the reason that a lot of people hate Nero after this fire, is that Nero confiscates a lot of the land that was destroyed in the fire, takes it as his own, which of course aggravates a lot of Roman people who used to own that land and property. And Nero builds the Domus Aurea, which is the golden house. This is this huge palace, okay? This is a huge upgrade for an imperial palace. And this becomes Nero's favorite place to live, of course. All the people that lost their property are just out of luck. And as a result, the people start to think, hey, maybe Nero's the guy that actually started this fire so that he could have his wonderful palace. Ultimately, Nero is going to die of suicide after numerous people throughout the empire start revolting. He realizes that there's no way he can hold on to power, and he kills himself. There's an interesting story of him killing himself. Supposedly, he slits his wrists. It's a really horrible story, but supposedly he slits his wrists and then tries to kill himself quickly, then decides he doesn't want to die yet. He binds his wrists, tries to slow it down, then speeds it up. He just kind of goes back and forth on how fast he wants to die. When Nero kills himself, supposedly he made a wonderful quote. He said, "What an artist dies with me." And here you see Nero's egotism, his delusion that he was a really talented artist when he says, "What an artist dies with me." And that brings us to the end of the Julio-Claudian emperors and the end of this lesson.